Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to talk about a way that I can't stop fishing a jig, and specifically a jig that I can't stop fishing. I've talked about it a few times on the channel. It's going to be the 6th Sense hybrid jig, but we're down here in Florida today. I did this last year. It was the most fun I have ever had, and we're going to try and do it again today. It's a way to fish this jig that is super exciting. You can basically fish it like a topwater, a swim jig, a chatterbait, everything. Like, you just cover a ton of water with it. You catch a lot of fish. There's some explosive bites. We're gonna break it all down in today's video, so stay tuned and let's get right into it. All right, so before we head out on the water and try and catch some fish with this jig, let's go ahead and talk about the jig itself, rod, reel, line, everything you need to know there. The rod we're gonna be using in today's video, I'm actually using just a 7-foot fast medium heavy. Usually I would be using my jig rod if I'm gonna be pitching and flipping this jig, but when I'm swimming it, I like to use a little bit lighter rod. It gives me a more accurate cast. It's easier to fish all day, making a lot of casts and long casts rather than just like pitching it with that heavy jig rod. And then most importantly, it has a softer tip to actually set the hook on these fish because they're gonna come up and try and get this bait from behind and do all kinds of stuff like that. So this is just a Cash and Core 7-foot medium fast action, medium heavy fast action. I have a Corrado MGL on here, 7 to gear ratio, so I can keep that bait moving if I need to, or I can drag it on the bottom and actually set the hook and reel those fish in and get them out of cover. We're gonna do both in today's video. You'll see later. I'll show you how versatile this jig actually is. And then 30-pound braid. I was fishing in Florida. I was fishing around a lot of vegetation. Straight 30-pound braid when I'm gonna be swimming this guy. If I'm swimming it around less vegetation or submerged vegetation, like up here in the north, like I'll fish this jig later this year fishing around some submerged vegetation, I'll go with like 14-pound test fluorocarbon or 17-pound test fluorocarbon. And you can do the same thing. You can still pitch and flip it, but you can also swim it. And that fluorocarbon works just a little bit better fishing around some deeper vegetation or stuff like that, or some clearer water. But I like the braid down there in Florida or some heavier vegetation. It gives me the confidence I can get that fish out of there. Then with the jig, unfortunately, I lost every one of my 3/8 ounce jigs. So this is a 1/2 ounce, but this is the 6th Sense hybrid jig. I've talked about it a few times with that triangular shape head and the inline line tie. It literally just splits weeds and comes through everything. Very rarely are you gonna get this hung up on anything except for docks. That's how I lost all of mine. I was pitching it under docks in between the grass, and the dock posts they didn't like me very much, especially the crossbars. They were all wood, and I trimmed my weed guards just a little bit too short and kept getting it hung up on the docks. I only had a handful of them anyway. I was starting to run low, so we'll be getting some more. But the 1/2 ounce will also work to do the same thing. Your bait will ride deeper in the water. So like up north here, I'll actually use this one as my swim jig rather than the 3/8, because that 3/8 only covers like 0 to 3 foot of water. If I'm trying to cover some milfoil or something down in 6 foot of water, you'll need that heavier jig anyway. So depends on your cover and what you're gonna be fishing. I will trim the weed guard to fit right up against the barb of the hook. So this one is actually perfect right out of the package. I think I was just trimming the other ones a little bit too short. And then they come in a variety of colors. It's really just picking the color that works best for where you're fishing. Down in Florida, green pumpkin with some type of black and blue works really good, or just like a straight black and blue would work good. I was just trying to mimic the bluegills that were swimming around that those fish are feeding on. That's golden shiners and bluegills are their main forage. This really doesn't look like a golden shiner. You can get one to look like a golden shiner, but I was trying to mimic all the bluegills and bluegill fry that were swimming around. And then my trailer, I'm gonna go with the 6th Sense Bongo. For whatever reason, this thing fits perfect on there. Not for whatever reason, it does fit perfect on there. I'm sure it was designed that way. It literally matches up perfect. The claws hang just below the skirt. It gives it enough action, and those ridges on the end of these claws just make that bait swim perfectly and really mimic the bluegill in the water. The other thing you could do if you really wanted to mimic bluegill is you could turn that bait sideways and give it a deeper profile. I was rigging it flat so that it would work its way over stuff. It's all in how you rig this bait. So if you rig it flat, it's going to almost come over things easier because it's going to have that keel on the bottom. If you rig it vertical, it's going to have a more bluegill action and presence, but it might get hung up just a little bit easier. But it'll probably come through grass better if you ring it vertical because it would be more streamlined. So just make that decision whenever you're out there on the water, and get a color to match. We were just using green pumpkin and a green pumpkin black and blue jig, and that was it. So let's head out on the water. We'll fish this thing around and catch us a couple fish on it. So now that we talked about the gear and everything you need to fish this bait, let's go ahead and rig it up, and then we're gonna get to fishing this and hopefully catch us some big fish. So what I'm gonna do, I have a 3/8 ounce Divine hybrid jig here. That is like my go-to size for doing this technique, just because it stays up in the water just a little bit and I can let it sink down if I need to. And then I have a 6 cents bongo trailer. I'm just gonna thread that right up on there as you would any other jig trailer. It just swims really well and fits perfectly on this bait, but you could use pretty much whatever you like. You could use a swim jig trailer too, like an actual swim bait. I like the craw style because there's a lot of bluegills in this lake, and that's usually what they feed on, bluegill, sunfish, stuff like that. So we have a green pumpkin, black and blue with a black and blue trailer, and it gives it that profile, that deeper bodied look like a bluegill. So now that we're all set up, let's get our bait caster dialed in here. Should be good there. Now we're gonna go ahead and do the fun part, which is fish it around. Now, on the edge of this grass line, probably not where I'm gonna be catching a fish. What we're gonna be doing is going back in these bays and fishing around these docks and stuff like that and hitting all the really shallow cover. Like, these fish in Florida get way shallower than you could ever imagine. So we're gonna get up there once we get around this big grass line here and literally work this thing 1 inch, 3 inches below the surface. And a lot of times you'll literally see these fish wake out of the grass and just come destroy this thing. It's a super exciting way to fish. I've had them blow out of the lily pads and just crush it on top of the water. So we'll show you exactly how to fish this once we get up there. All right, so now we're eased up here. We're on a grass line, but there you can see little stalks of grass sticking out way behind the grass line too. I do not get afraid with this bait at all. I will throw this thing as deep as I can. That's why we have the braided line on here. You could bump up to 50 if you really wanted to, but the 30 works for me. It cuts through the grass pretty well. And I'm literally gonna just churn this thing over top of all of this submerged cover because these fish could be anywhere. Didn't dial them in our reel good enough. Those fish could be anywhere up here on this grass. So they could be way deep in there, or they could be out on the edges of the lily pads. And a lot of baits you're not gonna be able to actually see or fish the entire thing, or it'll take forever. Like if you wanted to pitch all that with a jig, you'd have to pitch all the way back up in there and cover the water the entire way back. This, I can just swim it across the top and find the active ones that are swimming around on the edges of these lily pads or back in deep. I can just cover a ton of water doing this. And you can see as I get it hung in this stuff, I just kind of shake it free. And a lot of times you'll go to shake it free like that and it'll just they'll rip the rod right out of your hand. So we'll cover some water around. That was a bite right there, I missed him. Ugh, that felt like a little baby guy. I can't even describe to you how much fun this bite is. They get so shallow up in here. In this lake specifically, they've had a lot of rain in Florida, but this lake, for whatever reason, is always high. Like there's tons of water pushed way back up in there. It could be 3 foot deep over there. I'm not actually really sure. So they can live in all of that stuff. And the only way to find them is to cover water with baits up there like that. A couple of my other favorites are like prop baits and stuff. Like I can cover water way deep in there, but this jig is just too much fun. And we'll show you on this dock right here, the other reason that I like it so much when we get over there is because I can literally just pitch this jig right under that dock when I'm done working it around all this shallow cover up here. That's a big one. That's a big one. He's not giant, but I'll take him. That's exactly why I love fishing this jig. I can fish that bank up there and then just turn around and skip it right underneath this jig. Catch a big old largemouth like that. That's a pretty good one for this lake. This lake is either a 12-incher or it's a 5-pounder bigger. So this one's kind of an in-betweener, but still a nice one. Ate that jig as soon as I skipped it under there. All right, so we finished up fishing that dock, and then I can just go right back to swimming this dude along and fishing as I would any other area. So just cover a ton of water with this thing and we'll see what we can catch. Hopefully we can catch a couple bigger ones than that, or just some more fish in general. But I'll just throw it down there as far as I can. I actually saw a ton of bait fish moving back in there, so I'm gonna get even up tighter and really bomb that thing back there and see if I can get a bite. A lot of times those fish will sit near those balls of fry up there and guard fry, or who knows what they'll do. But they're in such shallow water that sometimes their movements can give them away, and I'll guide my casts accordingly based on what they're doing up there on the bank. If there's a lot of bait around, I'll cast it near that. I mean, they're always gonna be near bait fish. They could be fry or actual bait fish. Sometimes you'll see the fish actually V-wake up on the grass up there. Like I can see bait fish jumping everywhere up shallow. Like there is a ton of bait all up shallow today. I've seen it everywhere. So we'll keep burning this thing around and see what happens. There's one. Just destroyed it coming through that grass. Not a big one, but he's got some cool colors. Look at the colors on that fish. I don't know if you can see that very well. He's very striped, but that was pretty sweet. Literally just slow winding it through that grass and they'll rip the rod out of your hand. I mean, I love that bite so much. It's amazing. I can't even describe it, but like, they hit it so hard. Let's see if we can get us a couple more. So again, these are like the perfect areas that are right in front of me here. Just like I caught that fish on the other side of this dock here. I mean, that water can't be more than a foot deep up there. I couldn't get my boat up there if I wanted to. The only way to fish that is to really bomb this thing under there or over it and work it on back like a swim jig over the top of the grass. I mean, I work it almost like a topwater. It's gotta be 3 inches below the surface when I'm working it through there and just covering water. And a lot of times I'm using the fish to tell me where they're at. So I've been seeing some bait moving over here too. And I just saw a fish in this little corner kind of scurry along over here. So there's a chance we might get a bite. Like there's bait loaded right there. That should have had a fish right there. So I'll kind of work my way through this area. There's tons of bait up there. I'll work my way through this area a little bit more effectively here and kind of make a lot of pitches and casts at different areas and see if there's one hiding up in there. There we go. Little guy. Come here, buddy. Oh, that took a long time. They're not very cooperative on this jig this time of year, I guess. Last year they couldn't keep off of it. This year they're being finicky, but that is my favorite way to fish a jig. That's an absolute tiny fish, but it's so much fun. They just eat it, they hit it hard. It's a lot of fun fishing that bait. I would keep throwing it and trying to figure them out. It's a blast to do it, but we have some other videos we got to film. We're only down here for a few days and we got to get as much content as we can for over the winter. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I'm gonna throw him back. If you did, hit the subscribe button down below. Check this video out right here to talk more about a different way to fish this jig that I use up north. I fish the same jig just slightly differently. Catch a bunch of fish doing that as well, but for now, see you on the next one. We're gonna get back to fishing some other baits here and doing some other videos.